Hello and welcome to Florida Gators Live, episode 66, presented by FanDuel. It's always fun to do a show after a dub. Florida basketball goes on the road, gets a big win over Georgia. They've now won 4 in a row. We will certainly get into breaking that game down. We'll also be talking about some updates on the recruiting trail, and we'll even get into our spring football position by position previews, starting with what I think is probably going to be the biggest storyline of spring ball, which is the quarterback battle. So we'll get into all that. Excited to, but before we do that, as you've maybe noticed, not joined by Tyler Whitfield tonight. So Tyler, unfortunately, had to step away from the show, just busy with a new job and wasn't really able to work with it in his schedule anymore. So really appreciative to all his hard work growing the channel, launching the show more than a year ago before I even joined it. So really appreciative of him and just wish him all the best moving forward. But I am excited to welcome to the show Max Bernstein, who will be joining me as the co-host moving forward. Max is the assistant sports editor at the Alligator and covers Florida football as a beat writer. So, he's in the building multiple days a week. He's boots on the ground. So really excited to just have his expertise and insight on the show moving forward. So Max, with that being said, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tyler. I appreciate the kind intro and very excited to be here to talk all things Gators going forward. Obviously, great to start off to talk about something positive with the basketball game tonight. But like you said, I've been at the Alligator now for 7 semesters, boots on the ground. I covered the football team this past season. And yeah, just very excited to be here. Appreciate everybody tuning in. And yeah, let's get the show on the road.
Yeah, let's do it so we can get right into this basketball game. Florida goes on the road, beats Georgia 86-66. Todd Golden now 8-1, I believe, head to head against Mike White in his career at Florida. So, I mean, kind of a game where probably a little bit of a bigger margin than you would kind of feel like watching the game. I mean, Georgia came in at the end and kind of made it tight. I think cut it to 10 late in the second half before I believe like a 7-0 run from the Gators kind of put it out of reach there. But to me, the story of this game is the three balls finally starting to fall. I mean, it's been such a problem this year for this team. But tonight, Xavier Lee's your leading scorer. He hits 3 threes. He's 3 of 9. Boogie Fland hits a 3, scores 15. Isaiah Brown drops 12 coming off the bench. He was 3 of 4 from the 3-point line. So Florida as a team, 10 of 26, shooting 38%. And if this team continues to do that, they're more or less unbeatable. So I think certainly curious to see if that's a trend we see continue down the stretch here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, coming into tonight, I believe it was just north of 29% from 3 was the number, which was just about 350th in the country. Obviously, that's not the kind of stat you want to see. When you look at Florida's resume, that kind of sticks out like a sore thumb. And it's definitely played a role in games this season. I think, especially early on, the shooting was on point. I thought Xavier's shooting form looked a little better tonight. There was a little more arc on the shots. And it just seemed like there was more confidence from him, the most confidence we've seen from him since at least that Vanderbilt game, I would say. And even in a night where a guy like Thomas Houck doesn't put up a crazy performance, he finishes with 11 points on 2 of 8 shooting, 1 for 6 from beyond the arc. When you get an Isaiah Brown game where he's going to go and score 12 points, shoot that efficiently, play good defense, it kind of evens everything out. Defensively, this team has just been so impressive over the last couple games against some of the better offenses in the SEC this season. I mean, Georgia came into tonight averaging 91 points per game. Obviously, they were without their leading scorer tonight, and that played a role. But still, to only allow 66 points definitely is an impressive defensive performance. And I just feel like since that Auburn game, that was kind of the wake-up call this team needed. It was kind of like the Georgia game last year, it seems, where now it's just everything's starting to come together. And I think when you only take 26 threes, I know that's a lot of threes, but in today's basketball, that's in the grand scheme of things, that's not too many threes. If you're going to hit 38% of them, I mean, you're going to be happy with that at the end of the day.
Oh, yeah, 100%. No, I totally agree. And I mean, just like you said earlier, given how bad this team has been at 3-point shooting, I mean, yeah, That was so key, I think, in winning this game because it really could have easily been a much scarier game than it was. I mean, there was some sloppiness here. I mean, Florida wins the rebounding battle by 7, but it wasn't a dominant performance. I mean, they got out rebounded on the offensive end. And I think, there were a lot of sloppiness, 14 total turnovers from the Gators. I think 7 of those were from Alex Condon. So yeah, certainly when you look at the front court, not their best game. I mean, Ruben Chinyelu didn't have a double-double for the first time in a while. Granted, he still had 20 rebounds, but not the best game on the offensive end from those guys. So I mean, like we've seen flashes from the guards. They've each kind of had games where they show that, hey, we haven't completely forgotten how to shoot the three ball or just shoot in general, but not really everyone on the same night the way that we got it tonight. So I think that's a really encouraging trend. And like you said, I mean, this team is just trending in a direction where, anything can happen in the tournament, but this team does really seem to be improving, in the back half of the season when it really matters the most.
Yeah, and like you said about Chinyelu, 20 rebounds. He's probably going to vault into first in the country in rebounds per game. He was just below, I think it was 0.3 rebounds outside of that first spot. And, 20 rebounds in a game could vault that average a little bit. So he's going to be just about 12 a game. But, he did have 4 personal fouls tonight. So I thought Micah Hanlogden played one of his better games of the season. He might have only had 2 points, but he only took 1 shot. He had 6 rebounds. He had a block. That was a really nice block. And, I feel like he's obviously, his story has been such an interesting thing to watch. Obviously, with the injury he suffered in the SEC championship 2 years ago, he burned the red shirt year to come back, be a part of this team last year. And it's kind of been a slower start. I mean, coming into the year, there was conversation like, oh, what's really the difference in Chinyelu versus Hanlogden? They both had about the same impact in March Madness last year, I would say. But obviously, Chinyelu has separated himself this year as one of the better defenders in all of college basketball, if not the best. And Hanlogden's had some struggles, but I thought tonight was a good step. And obviously, defensively, like we talked about, Georgia shot 35% from the field tonight, 28% from 3. They had 4 players in the double digits. Blue Kane had 17 points and 11 boards, but he shot 6 for 15. I mean, when you can limit those guys to under 50%, 3 of the 4 guys who scored in the double digits shot under 50%. So, I mean, defensively, like we said, this is one of the better defensive teams in the country. I think Michigan is the first team that comes to mind, but Florida might be the second based on how they're playing right now.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, when you pair that with an offense that, despite not being able to shoot the three ball, has still been one of the best, most efficient in the country this year. I mean, you can see how this team is capable of making a deep run. I think you can also see how this team could get tripped up, be it the round of 32 or the Sweet 16 or whatever. Like, it's pretty easy to see what a disastrous tournament game could look like for this team. But I mean, it's really coming together on both ends. And I mean, like you said, I mean, Micah just is just, it's unfair to have Micah coming off the bench as your 6th man, in addition to guys like Chinyelu and Houck and Condon, in that front court, just because, not the best offensive player, but I think he's done a good job this year of not like playing outside of himself in that regard, kind of understands who he is and who he isn't. A really good defensive player too. So yeah, I mean, I think this team is really taking steps in the right direction. I mean, and it's it's coming at a good time because you've got Kentucky at home on Saturday. After that, the schedule is pretty manageable down the stretch. I mean, you've got a tricky game against an Arkansas team that's playing really well right now. You end the year with a trip to Rupp to play Kentucky again. But I mean, other than that, it's games against Mississippi State, South Carolina again, Ole Miss, a Texas team that's good, not great by any means. There's a lot of winnable games here, and I think you have a real path. I mean, you currently have a 1-game lead in the SEC, very real path to winning this conference. Which I think given the way it looked like things might be trending, I guess like if you go back to maybe after the Missouri game, I think it's really clear to see that once again Todd Golden has this team hitting its stride at the right time.
Yeah, and I think this is the 4th straight game Florida covers. Spread was 8.5 tonight on FanDuel for Florida. And, they win by 20. like you said, the game really never really got closer than 10 after the first 10 minutes of the game itself. And
Hmm.
like you said, previewing the schedule, this Kentucky game, I think it being at home is obviously an advantage for Florida. The trip to Kentucky at the end of the year, but the SEC is not the SEC we saw last year. I mean, I don't think that was sustainable for any conference. The level of basketball in the SEC last year was some of the best conference play by a whole conference we've seen. But this year it's been a lot weaker than I think a lot of people thought it was going to be. And I think Florida really stands out if you look at it just from an objective standpoint as the best all around team. Obviously, that 3-point shooting is a weakness, but if they're going to shoot 38%, and it's starting to, there's starting to be one of every 3 games where Florida has a really good shooting night, or a game like South Carolina where they just are like, okay, we're just not really going to shoot the three, and that worked out fine for them. So there's a number of ways Florida can beat you. This isn't a team that's relying on one player. This isn't a team that's relying on one certain thing. This is a very well-rounded team and a well-coached team. Todd Golden is obviously one of the better coaches in the country. He's proven that over the last couple of seasons. And again, like you said, there is an avenue where we could see this team, ride high into March, and there's just a game where it just doesn't fall for them. The
Hmm.
shots don't fall, and maybe a team neutralizes Chinua on the boards. But if not, I mean, this is a team that could absolutely make a run.
Yeah, I mean, Auburn kind of gave you the blueprint for that. Like, that was one of the few teams that Florida's faced who was really ready to go toe to toe from a physicality perspective, and we saw how that game turned out. But I mean, with that being said, I think when you compare this team to maybe last year's team, or like the very best teams in the country this year, the Arizonas, the Michigans, the Dukes, the UConns, who Florida played 3 of those teams tight. But I think maybe not as just like difficult in the sense that with a lot of those teams in Florida last year, like there wasn't really a clear avenue to beat them. This year there is that avenue, but like it requires a lot going right for you and a lot going wrong for Florida, because like you said, it's not as simple as you take this away, Florida's got nothing. That you there's not really an easy way to neutralize what Florida does. You have to really take away things that they excel at, like multiple things. Like you have to out rebound them, and you have to not let them score 70 points in the paint as they're prone to do sometimes. So I think that's the thing that makes me bullish on this team as we get closer to March, is not that I like this team is so good no one's going to beat them. It's just it takes a really specific matchup, and there's just a brand of team. I think certainly any team Florida would play in the first round, maybe even the first weekend, a lot of them probably are just not going to be built physically to really contend here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there can't be enough said about the front court. I mean, last year, obviously, the back court was the focus. And this year, going in, we knew it was going to be the front court. And I know Alex Condon can be sometimes a frustrating player to watch, because sometimes there's just plays he makes that you kind of are just sitting there and you're a little confused on what he might have seen. Obviously, easier
Like
to
7
say
turnovers
watching.
tonight.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, easier to say watching the game
Mm-hmm.
than probably being on the court, I would say. But yeah, 7 turnovers. I thought he had put together his best run of games this past week. But tonight, not his most effective performance, but still, Florida wins by 20 on the road against
Yeah.
a team that wanted to come in there and get some revenge based on how that game went a month ago, and a team that beat Florida last season when it seemed like nobody was going to beat Florida. They were the last team to. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, like you said, Todd Golden looks like he just kind of has Mike White's number. I mean, I think Florida fans unanimously could say they know who the better coach is. We've seen
Yeah, I
it
think
firsthand.
think that's about locked up, that debate.
For sure, absolutely. But we'll see. I think this Kentucky game will say a lot, and then from there, it's just, will Florida stumble? Will a team game plan like Auburn did, and find a way? Because if not, this team's going to have a lot of momentum going into the SEC tournament. And we saw last year when this team has momentum, they're a scary team to play against.
Yeah, and I think the reason it's so scary for opponents is it's not like this is like just some unbelievable heater that Florida's on where it's unsustainable. They're just playing so well. It's kind of the contrary, actually. Like in a lot of these games, they have played pretty sloppily. I mean, there have been a couple where they just were complete. I mean, the Alabama game was pretty lights out. But like, I mean, you look at the A&M game, like A&M couldn't buy a basket for the first 15 minutes of that game, and they still, Florida wasn't able to really separate early on there. So, in spite of kind of some sloppiness, this team continues to win, beat good teams by, double digits healthily. So, yeah, and I think it's in a really good spot. I mean, you would just like to see, man, like if you can put together a couple games of this kind of shooting, I'll be kind of talking about, because I still think this team has a Final Four ceiling. But I mean, if you're doing that consistently, you're just my national championship pick at Florida because of how good you are at everything else. So I think that's what I'm really going to be watching down the stretch. Is this something you can build on, or was this just kind of a one-off thing? Which it might be a one-off thing because we've seen it be a one-off thing at points this year.
Absolutely. And just one more point I wanted to
Yeah,
make. I mean, we're talking about how the SEC might not be as great this season. And, I brought that up. But, I mean, they've beat Georgia by 20. That's a tournament team. They beat Texas A&M by 19. That's a tournament team. Alabama by 23, tournament team. I mean, in their last 3 games, they beat Tennessee by over 20. I mean, they're not playing just anybody. Like, they're playing tournament teams, and obviously we saw how close they played. I think looking back, that Arizona game, it was like, oh, first game of the season, we lost, whatever. I mean, Arizona turned out to be pretty good team. Their one loss was in arguably the hardest place to play in college basketball. And Duke, 1-point game. I mean, a lot of things could have swung, and I think a lot of people would be like, wow, Florida. But the 18-6 might not be telling of how good this team is. And I think if you look at any advanced metric, they'll agree with that as well.
yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, I think Florida's I don't know what they are after the game. They were 7th in Ken Palm coming into the game, I believe.
Yeah, I
So
mean, let's. I know on Torvik too, they were 4th. So definitely analytically, this team
yeah,
has been. They kind of are under seeded in a way. I think they're now reaching the 3 line in Lenardi's bracketology today,
yeah,
and as the top SEC team. I mean, this team could definitely move up to a 2
yeah,
at some point, depending on what happens in front of them. I think a 1 is pretty much out of question, just
yeah. The ones are too good.
based on how this season has gone, unless everyone decides to start losing. But
Yeah.
it's not as much about your seed. It's just about who you play and how you beat them. So,
No, and I mean, if first of all, if Florida gets either a 2 or a 3 seed, they're probably going to be playing that first weekend in Tampa, which I know a lot of fans would be happy to see. But I think just to me, just in general, getting back to a top 4 seed. I mean, I know you return a lot of pieces, but even returning that incredible backcourt, which was even better than we thought it was going to be coming into the year, you can't
ooh,
overstate
sorry.
how big of a loss you're good. How big of a loss Walter Clayton, Elijah Martin, and Will Richard were. Like having to replace your entire backcourt, and frankly, to this point, them kind of being whiffs in terms of the replacements, and you're still in position to potentially be a top 3, maybe even top 2 seed. Like again, preaching to the choir here, I know, but it just kind of goes to show how impressive of a job Todd Golden's doing here.
Absolutely, 100%.
Hello, JLB. So JLB, I don't know if you missed the beginning, but I'll just bring it up again here. So Tyler Whitfield had to step away from the show. Just he's busy with work. It's not really able to do it with his schedule anymore. So this is Max Bernstein, who is joining me from now on as the co-host. Really excited to have Max here. But so yeah, that's a change moving forward. With that being said, I think we can get into some recruiting because obviously not too far away from spring ball here. Just a few, less than a month, I think, at this point, or just about a month. So But, still right now, pretty big time on the recruiting calendar. Last month in January, Florida had a ton of guys on campus in the 2027 class for junior days. And now we're kind of at the point where these guys are starting to schedule some official visits. And one big one that's on the books already that we're going to kind of focus on here, but we'll talk about some others as well, is Maxwell Hiller, who's a 5-star offensive lineman from Coates, interior offensive lineman, although seems like there's some flexibility there with tackle. So maybe project as the tackle at the next level. Maxwell Hiller, he's from Coatesville, Pennsylvania. He's listed by 247 at 6'5", 300. So kind of, maybe slightly, kind of about the size where you kind of see him playing either way. But he's currently a top 10 national prospect on the composite, top 5 in 247's own rankings. And he will be on campus June 19th. He's the only visitor, I believe, as of right now, scheduled for that weekend. Decent amount of guys scheduled for the weekends before. But he's also got trips in the weeks leading up to that to Alabama on the 29th of May and Tennessee on June 12th. Ohio State's also in his top 4 right now. So certainly a lot of competition here, but, a guy from Pennsylvania, not surprising. Phil Troutwine, the new offensive line coach, prior relationship there. And, he was considering Penn State, and now he's kind of, Florida's kind of taken the spot there. And it seems that Florida's in a decent position here for what would be a huge win at a position that they've kind of struggled to recruit. I mean, we've talked about it a lot on this show, haven't landed a 5-star offensive lineman, consensus at least, since Martez Ivey in 2015. So, Max, where is kind of your take from what you've seen on where the Gators stand here, and just how big of a get would this be if they're ultimately able to pull it off?
Absolutely. Like you said, there is some stiff competition here for Hiller, but that prior relationship with Coach Troutwine, Hiller was very much considering Penn State. That was a huge school for him, a school that was in all his top lists, and a school he talked about plenty, being local there. And after James Franklin's firing, and obviously Phil Troutwine joining UF staff, there's been a little bit more talk. Florida reoffered him with Troutwine, and since then, the rumors have just been heating up about Hiller. And like you said, a top 5 player in the country according to 247, top 10 according to the composite. I mean, this would be a centerpiece of Florida's offensive line. Absolutely. Like you said, he has flexibility. He's not listed at around 300, 305. He's played some right tackle. It wouldn't surprise me at all if he came in and competed for the right tackle spot if he were to join UF next season. That's a spot where right now Caden Jones played most of last season. But obviously, if you bring in a 5-star recruit, especially in the offensive line, I think the expectation is they're probably going to play pretty early on. If you look around the country this year, a lot of the freshmen that got the most snaps were 5-star offensive linemen at Alabama, at Oregon, at Georgia, schools like that. Florida definitely wants to add their name to that list. Like you said, visits to Alabama and Tennessee before Florida, Ohio State, that last team in the top 4. I mean, it's not going to be easy. I think Alabama looks like Florida's biggest competition here for Hiller. It's a school that's been going after him nonstop over the last couple of years. And obviously a very highly touted program, and a program that has produced countless NFL offensive linemen. Florida's going to have probably 2 guys drafted this year. I mean, that's a good look. And obviously bringing in a coach who has had 3, about to become 4 first-round picks that he's coached over the last 8 years. I mean, I think Coach Troutwine is absolutely the key to this, and he's going to go hard after Hiller. That's for sure. All indications is this is definitely Florida, if not Florida's biggest priority, one of their biggest for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, I agree, at or near the top of the board here for Maxwell Hiller. And I mean, yeah, Troutwine's so key. And I mean, this is why, Florida fans have been wanting him so bad for so many years to eventually join the staff, because, his recruiting ties, his development of NFL talent speaks for itself. And, I mean, I think like this is a great example. And he's not the only one, but, Pennsylvania guys that Florida otherwise probably, I mean, he's got other SEC schools in here. So maybe this is not safe to say, but like the kind of guy that probably would not have given Florida the time of day in the past just because of the geographic ties all of a sudden is because Troutwine's built those relationships in the past. So, yeah, I mean, this would be so huge, like you said, for Florida's offensive line room because he's a guy that I think, the kind of talent that, again, you don't really think of offensive line recruits being instant impact guys because most of them aren't. But this is the level of prospect where, they at least can be. So, I think that would be so huge. But then also, I think it would just be such a huge get on the recruiting front, like an early win for this staff and Troutwine specifically to kind of prove, hey, we can still go after and get, elite talent on the offensive line, which has been just such a struggle for a decade plus now.
Absolutely. And I think it would, provide some of that faith that Florida fans are looking for. I mean, a lot of Florida fans feel like, why not Florida competing for these 5-star recruits, some of the better recruits in the country, especially when you have a position coach who, number one, has, like you said, this great proven record of developing talent, not just high-end talent, but talent as a whole. I looked into this the other day, but those 4 first-round picks, 3 of them were 3 stars and 1 was a 0-star. I mean, we're not talking about guys who came out of high school looking like they were going to be the best players in the country. But imagine what someone who could develop a 3-star into a first-round pick could do with the 5-star. Obviously, that's night and day in pure talent, if you want to say that, based on however they're evaluated, traits, whatever it may be. But this is a guy who, all indication is this guy's going to be more or less plug and play and someone who can make an instant impact. And like you said, it's very difficult for offensive linemen because the pace of play is going to be huge. I mean, you're going up, the quality of pass rush you are going against in high school football is definitely not going to be on the level of SEC football when you're facing Georgia every year. That goes without saying. But yeah, this would just be a huge get and someone that Florida is absolutely competitive for. Every day, it just seems like they're trending more upwards here. And like I said, Alabama is absolutely a team in the mix. But this, from all indications, this doesn't seem like a player who's going to make one visit to Alabama and go, "Yep, I'm not visiting anywhere else. I don't want to hear what anybody else has to say. I'm set." I think he's going to take in everything. He's locked in a top 4 very early and seems to know the type of program he's looking for. So if Florida can make that pitch, when he was on campus in January, he said that visit 100% cemented UF for him. And it was just an amazing visit. I mean, he had nothing but positive things to say. And I think that's a great indication not only about Coach Troutwine, but about this coaching staff as a whole and the recruiting effort they've already begun to make. And we'll go more into that, obviously, when we talk about some of the other recruits. But Hiller would just be, I mean, like you said, it's been over 10 years now since a consensus 5-star offensive lineman has signed with Florida. And we've seen some great offensive linemen on Florida over these past couple of years. But when you get a pure talent like Hiller projects to be, that would just be a huge get.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you talked about the impact that first visit had last month. We'll see if the official has that same impact. I mean, I will say, currently the way it's positioned as the last visit, I mean, I think this is probably less of a talking point now that there's NIL and rev share and contractual agreements. But, conventional wisdom historically has always been that whoever has that last visit has the biggest advantage just because you're the last one kind of making your pitch. It's going to be the most salient. So, we'll see. I think Florida's really well positioned here. And we'll see how long his recruitment drags out. Does it drag into the season? Does he kind of want to see some proof of concept first? I mean, he's moved, like you said, he's progressed pretty fast, like locked into top 4 already. So maybe a guy that's looking to commit over the summer, maybe after his run of official visits. So yeah, I mean, this would be a huge early piece because Florida only has one commit in the class currently from Amari Nugent, so who's also scheduled an official visit in the coming months, which we will talk about too. But yeah, anything else to add on Hiller before we move on and talk about some other guys here?
Yeah, absolutely. One more point, and like you just brought up about how this has kind of moved quickly. I would not be shocked at all if he locks in a commitment somewhere before the season. I feel like that's where this is trending. I
Mm-hmm.
think, obviously proof of concept for the Florida team as a whole. I mean, of course, you want to have faith that it's going to be better than 4-8.
Yeah.
But obviously, if it's another season like that and you're a 5-star and you're kind of looking, it's like, do I really want to go somewhere 4-8? But I think just having a coach like Phil Troutwine on your position group, and I think that factor alone, what he's been able to do for his players, regardless of the team, because even though Penn State obviously had a disappointing season, they're still going to have, it looks like 3 guys on this offensive line drafted, one probably in the first round in Big Ione at guard, and then Drew Shelton and Nolan Rucci at tackle, who are both probably going to be drafted, even in a bad year. So I don't think enough can be said about how big of a get Troutwine was for Florida to be in the conversations for players like Hiller and other offensive linemen of this caliber going forward. And Hiller could start a trend here if he joins UF and he sees some success. I think a lot of offensive linemen are going to want to trust the process, and that's something that Troutwine talked about when he looks for recruits. So absolutely, just a massive situation to monitor, something we will be keeping tabs on, of course, as his visits go on and after he makes his official down here in Gainesville. But yeah, just definitely would be a huge, huge get for John Sumrall, for Phil Troutwine, and for the Gators as a whole.
Yeah, Troutwine, seems like an addition that's already working wonders. I mean, you want to see them actually land the guys first, but good early start, kind of making up some ground and sort of just carrying over, like we said, relationships he already had. Giving the Gators an inroad with players they maybe otherwise wouldn't have one with. But I think maybe we'll just work backwards from there, considering that's the latest weekend of official visits currently set. Is the last week of June? Do you know if the last week of June is also an official visit weekend, or is that the last
Not a
one? Do you know the dates on that off the top of
not
your
a
head?
not 100% sure off the top of my head, but right now, like you said, Hiller is the only player scheduled for that 19th through 21st of June currently, and the weeks before you've got 5 guys coming in those weekends. So obviously, this is a big fish if they're gonna dedicate a lot of resources and maybe just bring him in alone. That I
Yeah.
think that says a lot.
Yeah, and he's not the only big fish that Florida's going to have on campus in the months of May and June. There's plenty of other guys to talk about who have locked in official visits. One I'll look at the week before, who's coming that June 11th through 13th weekend. Jaden Upshaw, 4-star top 100 receiver out of Lee County, Georgia. Top 15 receiver in the class, number 79 player in the class per the 247 Sports Composite. He's already locked in a handful of other visits as well to A&M, Texas A&M, Alabama, and Miami. So, again, stiff competition here. But this seems like a guy that Florida is prioritizing pretty heavily here, as far as the wide receiver class in 2027.
Absolutely. Upshaw was very productive over the last 2 seasons, especially in 2025. He had 47 catches for 902 yards and 8 touchdowns in only 10 games. He's over 2,000 yards over the last 3 seasons. He's shown this big playability that obviously Florida is going to want to stretch the ball a little bit more under Buster Faulkner. I think that's something he's made clear, something they want, this big play element. It felt like at points last season there was really none of that. Of course, this offense, we don't know how well it's going to translate to SEC football, but I would be surprised if there isn't at least more deep shots with this offense. But like you said, one top 100 player in the country, top 15 receiver. You mentioned some big fish again, and that's going to be a constant theme for a lot of these recruits. Texas A&M, I mean, we know they have money. I mean, that's for sure. Alabama and Miami, they're not afraid to spend. Auburn, another team that has been going after Upshaw pretty heavily. But when you see a 6'1" receiver going into their senior year of high school who already has been so productive before and after the catch, I mean, there's no secret into why this is a guy that Florida and all these other big schools are really looking at and honing in on.
Yeah, and I think, always worth pointing out that these guys are still rising high school seniors. They still have another season to rise or potentially fall in the rankings. But so yeah, I mean, I think, looking at that weekend, there's kind of a couple other guys on there that are sort of fast rising guys that maybe aren't the highest rated right now, but again, a lot, it's we're not even halfway through February. Like a lot can change between now and signing the early signing period in December in terms of guys' rankings. Upshaw, a major receiver target in the class. Another one who will also be on campus that weekend is Amari Patterson from South Carolina, who is, let me pull up his rankings. Yeah, so he's not as highly rated. He's a 3, depending on where you look, he's more of a borderline 3 or 4 star, but also seems like a receiver that they're interested in. Couple other guys on campus that weekend. 3-star defensive lineman, Tyler Alexander, sort of edge rusher, Isaac McNeil, and defensive lineman, Jason Johnson. So any of those guys, you kind of have anything, any thoughts about locking in visits with them?
Yeah, like you mentioned with Patterson, another receiver, like you said, has been on that kind of 3-4 star line there. Another 6'1" receiver, about 190. This is the trend around the country for receivers. You want that kind of size. That's kind of the ideal size to even project going forward. A guy who could play at the catch point, but also isn't too big and has speed. And I just think Florida obviously already has a great receiver core, but you can never have enough receivers. It's one of those positions where you never know. And we saw that this season for Florida, especially with the injuries piling up at that position. And I just think that's a someone definitely to watch. I think Isaac McNeil, like you mentioned, he's kind of a hybrid linebacker edge player. I think he would be a good fit in the jack room with Bam Hardman and kind of would fit the scheme pretty well. He still has definitely room to bulk up at 6'2", 210, what he's listed at. He could definitely put on some weight. Bama, they're looking at him, and sometimes when it's not a very highly touted recruit and you see an Alabama and a Florida on them, I think that says a lot about what we may not see, but what might be said in the rooms themselves. He had 4 sacks in 2024, and yeah, 2 defensive linemen, Tyler Alexander, Jason Johnson. Tyler Alexander, a South Florida guy from Wellington, Notre Dame, Texas A&M, Florida State, all with offers, along with a bunch of other programs. 6'5", 300 going into his senior year. I mean, that's a guy who has the body type you're looking for an interior lineman. So definitely you can kind of see where Florida went with this visit weekend with the 2 skill position guys and then front 7 defensive players. I think those are 2 spots. Like we said, you can never have enough depth at those 2 positions.
No, and they've been pretty straightforward about the fact that they don't think they do. I mean, I think John Summerall said verbatim, right, that he would have liked to have added more depth both at offensive and defensive tackle in the portal in an ideal world. So they're pretty transparent about the fact that that's an area where they want to build the depth and the long-term development. But I mean, it is interesting, like looking at a guy like McNeil, currently unrated on 247, but like you said, Alabama's sniffing around there. They've got a visit scheduled the week after. So, I'd say that's probably, we talk like we just were talking about, how these guys still have the opportunities to rise really significantly in the rankings. I would say when you've got Florida and Alabama coming after you and you're unrated, probably not going to stay unrated for too long. So that's something I'm going to be watching for, certainly as the recruiting season progresses. But yeah, I mean, I think some guys here that you know maybe you're not going to, as a fan, go crazy about the idea just because they're not that top 50 kind of player. But certainly when you look at who else is in the mix, I think are guys that it's understandable why the staff is so high on them.
Absolutely. And I think recruiting philosophy wise for a lot of this staff, I think stars are kind of, obviously we talk about star ratings and it's a way to differentiate these players and to say, oh, well, this guy might have the potential to be great. And a lot of the time, yeah, they could be right. A 5-star player, a lot of that time just ends up being a first round draft pick. But I think it's more about the attitude these guys have, what they can bring to the room, certain skill sets. If they you talked about John Summerall saying that they wanted to add more depth on the offensive and defensive line. I think that was no secret. Those are the two position groups that really got hit the hardest by the draft this year, with a lot of defensive linemen and pass rushers heading out of the door, graduating. So, and Gerald Chapman, who obviously is staying on Florida's staff as the defensive line coach, he kind of talked about that during his media availability on Friday. He addressed what Coach Summerall said when he was asked about it and said, obviously that's not really something I can control as much, if there was one more guy to have in the room, but he had a lot of confidence and he made it clear that there was going to be guys currently in the room that may not be talked about that are going to emerge as players. He singled out some of Joseph Mbachu, Brendan Bett, a couple of those guys who had playing time last season. So we'll see how Florida's defensive line progresses, but obviously more talent, more bodies in that room is never a bad thing, and something that Florida is definitely going to try and address going forward.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so I think just to kind of continue on with looking at some of the top names Florida's got coming on campus this summer. The week prior, the weekend of June 4th through 6th, I think one of the biggest names is a running back here, Andrew Beard, 4-star from Bogart, Georgia. Top 5 running back in the class. He's, I think, 63 in the 247. On the composite, he is, sorry, this is some great radio right now. On the 247 composite, yeah, he's 85 in the composite. So top 100, whether you're looking at 247's own rankings or the composite, and also still a top 5 running back. So yeah, I mean, a guy that, Buster Faulkner has connections to. I want to say, is this the same school that Philo went to? Am I wrong about that?
Sounds right. Let's see. Again, great radio here.
Yeah.
Still, yes.
Yeah, it is the same school. Yeah, okay. I thought that sounded familiar. Yeah, I knew the hometown was the same. So yeah, clearly a school that Buster Faulkner has some ties to. Yeah, I mean, I think this is a prior relationship that Florida and Buster Faulkner have. So a lot of competition here, but I think, curious to see how that pans out.
Yeah, I mean, one of those main competitors is Georgia, and a name familiar, probably not in a delightful way to some Florida fans. Garrison Hurst is Andrew's uncle, and obviously he was very prolific at Georgia. Also, Andrew's dad was a running back at Appalachian State from 2000 to 2002. So this is a guy, like we said, with that relationship to Faulkner, has definitely become more on Florida's radar. Georgia, Tennessee, and Clemson all have official visits. Alabama and Indiana have also been mentioned as teams to watch. And it's not hard to see why. This is a guy who, as a 10th grader, ran just over an 11-second 100-meter dash. He's a good pass catcher. He has over 20 catches out of the backfield the last 2 seasons. I mean, this is a guy who's shown some real dual threat running back ability. What I mean by that, a guy who can obviously run the ball and catch the ball. And that's something that I think Florida definitely wants to have in their back pocket at the running back spot. And obviously, like the elephant in the room here, we're looking at the 2027 class. Jaden Ball is probably going to the NFL after next season. So
Yeah, almost certainly.
I would say the percentage chance of that is pretty high, barring an injury or a down season.
I don't even
But
know. Yeah, maybe barring a down season, I'm not even sure I'd say barring an injury. Because like I think, I mean, God forbid, but like I think if Jaden Ball were to have like an injury on the first play of the season, I think he would still have significant draft stock.
absolutely. I mean, it's a good running back class next year, but he's absolutely in the mix with your Isaac Browns of the world as guys to watch at the top of that class. So obviously, it's a great thing that Jaden Ball is back at Florida for another season. But looking to the future, I mean, Duke Clark showed some things in some limited playing time and dealt with some injuries, but this is a guy who has the pedigree to potentially be established as that next Florida running back, and of course another Georgia guy. So, there's a little track record there. But yeah, Georgia, UGA definitely probably the team to watch as competition here. But I mean, Tennessee, Clemson, Indiana, Alabama. I mean, like we said, these are some of the top programs in the country, top spending programs in the country as well.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think that, curious to see if Florida can close there. Also on campus that weekend will be a four-star Orlando edge, another top 100 player on the composite, 6'5", 225 edge, Frederick Ards. He's also locked in a visit with South Carolina, some other SEC schools, Alabama A&M in the mix as well, FSU's in the mix. So, I think one thing that I'm a little interested to see, and this, because we haven't talked about a lot of Florida guys here so far, a lot of guys from the state of Florida. And, we know that like Summerall's ties are so deep, like in Alabama. We know that Buster Faulkner's ties are deep in the state of Georgia. And obviously, Troutwine's ties are deep in Pennsylvania and kind of the whole Midwest and Northeast region, because that's kind of where their, talent deposits are from. But I think it is fair to question, how this staff would recruit actually in state, because not a ton of Florida ties. Obviously, Brandon Harris in the secondary is an exception there. But this is a Florida guy from Orlando, typically an area Florida has recruited pretty well historically. And he's a really good player, top 100 prospected edge, always a place where you want to be getting guys in and developing. Because, I mean, just elephant in the room, if Jaden Woods had left in the portal, I think that would be a pretty big question spot coming into this season.
Absolutely. And Ards, a guy who has been on Florida's radar for a while, even when they were struggling last season, he said positive things about how Florida's pass rushing unit looked as a whole. Guys like Jaden Woods and obviously the departing George Guns and Tyreek Sapp. But this is a guy who is right around top 100, four-star, pretty much locked in. And, there's not like a school here that, South Carolina is a school he's visiting, but this seems like a spot where Florida could absolutely make a hard push and potentially land Ards, who would be a big get in this edge room. He had 11 sacks this past season at 73 tackles, which that's a very high number for an edge rusher. And I know John Summerall, this is a guy he really wants and has personally been pushing for, according to some reports. So wouldn't be surprised at all if this is someone Florida goes really hard after and would be one of their top priorities and would absolutely fill a need, because yes, Jaden Woods came back, and yes, he obviously has eligibility going into next year. He can't go pro after this next year, but again, we have to see how Florida plays this season. But another bad season, and I don't think it's an absolute certainty that Jaden Woods would stay after that, because this is a guy who obviously has all intention of becoming a professional and showing out on the biggest stage he can. So edge is definitely always a need. Like we said, front seven depth, another spot last season with some injuries, especially in the interior, but even at edge, with Gums went down a couple times, and you always need to get after the passer, especially in the SEC when you're playing some of the best quarterbacks and some of the best receivers who, if you give a quarterback 5 seconds in the pocket in the SEC, you might as well let the guy into the end zone. So always a priority to go after another pass rusher.
Yeah, and a guy, at least recruiting pedigree wise, would indicate maybe a guy who could see the field pretty early. And he's not the only guy, in-state guy, that's going to be on campus that weekend. Another offensive lineman, Sean Tatum from Port St. Lucie. Another blue chip recruit. Florida's in the mix here along with Miami and Tennessee. He's also locked in visits with those schools. So, we'll see, going toe to toe with I don't know if Port St. Lucie counts as, I don't know how much you count that as like South Florida, but, going into South-ish Florida and competing with Miami for a guy. So that's, I think, an interesting litmus test there in its own right.
Yeah, I mean, a guy, like you said, Tennessee and Miami, but so far it seems like the indication is Tennessee and Florida are his top two schools. I mean, Miami, of course, making a push, but, Troutwine, again, another relationship here. They talked at Penn State, and now, he talked about the energy he felt from him and someone that when they were on the visit, he could just feel that. And he's heard from some Florida players. And I mean, again, another guy who could potentially slot in on this interior line, listed at 6'3". This is a pure interior guy, it seems to be. But again, kind of local, about 4 hours out southeast, more my area originally, but wouldn't be too bad of a drive, at least for him. He'd have to fly to Tennessee probably. So definitely someone to watch. Two other visitors that weekend, and Jackson Ballinger at tight end and Joaquin Gouda at linebacker. But these 3 4-stars all coming in at the same time and at 3 very different position groups. I think that says a lot about the ambition of this staff and trying to bring in all these top recruits and bring Florida back to competing for these top guys. I mean, obviously, this roster is pretty stacked with 3 and 4-star guys. But like I said before, it's not only about the star, it's about the type of player. And these are guys that Coach Summerall and his staff are identifying, and guys they think could have an impact. Even these lower rated guys like Jackson Ballinger, who might not have a star rating, but has offers and has the kinds of traits size-wise that would be ideal for this offense.
Yeah, just another guy that, we'll see how, not currently rated, but we'll see how it sort of ultimately looks in a few months, because like we've said a lot of times, these things can change really quickly. To kind of wrap up here, the week before the last weekend of May, handful of guys on campus as well. Maybe the biggest name is Amari Nugent, the 4-star cornerback who's from American Heritage, who's currently the only commit in the 2027 class. A couple other 4-stars, tight end George Lamons, who has fairly recently, I think coming out of junior day, named Florida his number 1. So we'll see if that's still how that stands by the time we get to May. Another Troutwine guy in Terrence Smith, who's from Lansdale, Pennsylvania. So a 4-star interior offensive lineman there. So again, we've talked about it a lot, but it's kind of the Troutwine effect. I mean, so many of these guys on the offensive line are guys that Florida, with maybe a couple exceptions, but for the most part, Florida was not really in the mix for, but they are now. So we'll see if they close, but certainly an interesting spot they're in.
Absolutely. And Lamont's a guy who Florida State is going really hard after, but the most recent indication is Florida is the team to beat for him. And I think the tight end spot, might not be from a production standpoint in Faulkner's offense a huge spot, but a spot where we've seen, a guy like Jackson Hawes, who didn't put up crazy stats at Georgia Tech, but got drafted, immediately played an impact for the Bills this season. So the system is beneficial for these tight ends. Of course, they're going to want guys who could block and, can, of course, catch the ball and make stuff happen with the ball in their hands. You're not asking this guy to catch 70 passes a season, but but when you could get a 4-star tight end in, you kind of start scaring defenses a little. Okay, we do have to worry about this guy, not just, your Vernell Browns and your Dallas Wilsons, if they're both still here next season and Lamont joins the team.
Yeah, I mean, this is something Tyler and I talked about ad nauseum, but I mean, I think that was the biggest, I think, indictment, if you just want to look at an individual position of the Billy Napier era, was the tight end group, because of just how much 12 personnel they ran when it was clearly the weakest, I think, single position on the roster, both in terms of recruiting and development. So, just as a room, like, I mean, Hayden Hanson's a solid player. Like, I think he's going to have an all right season at Oklahoma. But, like, I mean, just if we're being honest, like that position was really lagging behind. And Summerall said, and Buster Faulkner has said, we'll pivot to, running the kind of offense that suits the personnel. So, I mean, I don't think neither of us probably anticipate a lot of 12 personnel, especially this year. But I think that's something they could build to if they get the bodies in. But right now, they just still don't really have position, even though, like you said, probably not going to be like a focal point of the offense with Buster Faulkner the way it was at least allegedly supposed to be under Billy Napier's offense. But yeah, that'll be a position worth watching, and Florida's in the mix for a couple guys there.
For sure. I think, like you said, the tight end group, as a fan, as someone who's reported on this team, it's been a spot of, honestly, disappointment, I think would be the word. Like you said, Hayden Hanson, obviously a good blocker. He was used in some very weird spots.
Yeah.
Put out wide.
Yeah.
At 6'7", 255.
That's why I'm kind of bullish on him next year, just because I think more competent coaching can probably get better results out of that play.
Most likely. I actually think, retaining Amir Jackson, who I think, obviously we didn't see a lot, but I think there's something there. What we did see, I liked. I think he has the athletic profile. He's good in the video game, that's for sure. He was my go-to dynasty tight end when I loaded up the game for the first time this year, and he developed. So I don't know if that says anything. Probably not. But obviously a guy who looked like he was out the door and now comes back. And I think there's a plan there. And bringing in 2 tight ends over these 4 weeks, I mean, there's obviously an indication that this is a position that they've identified as somewhere they need to recruit going forward. I mean, they kind of went the depth route at tight end in the portal. We don't really know how it's going to look. There, 3 or 4 guys kind of competing. But again, like a lot of spots on this team, and we'll talk about that in the quarterback room later, it's going to be competition. I think you want guys who are going to compete. And a lot of guys are going to see the field. I don't think this is a team where just someone's just going to be in there and play every snap. I think the more depth you can have, the better. And if they fit what Florida wants in this profile, what this coaching staff wants, because personally, again, this is my first episode, so I would like to make this clear. I am pretty bullish on John Summerall. I do believe in the direction Florida is heading. I think this is going to ultimately be a good hire. I feel more confident in that, just based on his personality and based on what we've seen so far. But of course, the biggest indicator will be what we see on the field. And we won't know about that really until, the earliest, some practice in the Orange and Blue game, but of course, August and September.
Yeah. And so until we get there, we're kind of just going to be judging off what we see in spring ball and what we're seeing out on the recruiting trail. So, this will be something we're going to be watching, of course, in the weeks and months to come. But Florida's got already a decent amount of players coming on campus for official visits this summer, and I'm sure more will be added in the list as we to that list as we get closer. But so that'll move us on to because talking about the way they're building and the early returns, like, and how bullish we are on Summerall, I'm fairly bullish. I mean, I'm cautiously optimistic, I think is how I'd put it. I think the way he's going about building it is, I think, the right way. Like, I think he gets what it's going to take. I think the bigger question is, frankly, how competitive is Florida as a program poised to be? Because I think that's going to dictate his ceiling here. So when we talk about, what does Florida's ceiling look like, at least in the recruiting department, I think a lot of that comes down to finances, just being frank. And one thing that a quote that from this week in media that I think maybe raised some eyebrows around the fan base came from Phil Troutwine. As we're talking about the offensive line recruiting and being in the mix for these guys like Maxwell Hillard. I'll just read this quote. I'll read this quote from your tweet, actually, Max. This is what Phil Troutwine said the other day. I don't think for every single recruit we're going to be the highest bidder. So sometimes kids have to take a chance on me and know that I'm going to develop them and get them to the next level, which is the money they really want, right? So, I mean, obviously, I think pretty easy to see why this caught some people's attention. I think every fan base in the country, at least to some extent, has a degree of anxiety over where they stand in this sort of financial pecking order that has become so determinant for the kind of talent you're going to be able to get on the roster. So I'm kind of curious, Max, like, you were in the building when he said this, in the room when he said this. What was kind of your impression of what Troutwine was trying to get across there?
Yeah, I think obviously that quote caused a little bit of a stir on social media when I put it up, and there's some comments like, why are you saying that out loud? Like,
Yeah.
you're kind of putting that out there.
Transparency. Like, you don't normally see that level of transparency, especially from a position coach.
I will say, first of all, just up to that point, the transparency from the coaching staff thus far in the Summerall era has been really refreshing as a member of the media in the room. There was some, I covered the team last season, and that was really my first season with the team. I had covered some spots, but sometimes you can tell when coaches are kind of just giving you coach talk and when coaches are telling you how they feel. And I feel like we're getting more of the latter. And I think that started from the beginning in Summerall's introductory press conference when we walked in the door and they handed us a packet of exactly what his contract was. That was kind of like, I know it's public knowledge. We could have found it, but they're going to hand it to us and we could look at it and, okay. Feels a little different when you walk into the building now. And it feels like people want to be there a little bit more. So just a general vibe thing, just from being in the building 3 times a week. But yeah, that quote obviously caused a lot of stir. And I think the truth, and it might be a little hard for some Florida fans to hear, is, they aren't going to be outspending a lot of these schools. I mean, there was definitely some players that could have gone to the portal and fetched more money. A prime example, Miles Graham. Obviously, this is a guy who loves the Florida Gators, loves being at Florida. And I think I saw reported like $400,000 was about the estimate of how much he was going to be getting paid. This is one of the better linebackers in the conference. If he hit the open market, we'd be talking some money here. Obviously, Jaden Woods, I think he probably got offered more money from Texas. Texas is a team who, based on some sources, their NIL budget for the January portal was $3 million more than any other team. $23 million.
Baugh too. I'm sure Baugh took a pay cut to come back as well with Texas in pursuit. And then you look at who they ultimately got in Rayleigh Brown and Hollywood Smothers. I'm sure they paid those guys a lot too. So, 100%.
Yeah. So, based on that January portal budget, they had Florida listed 11th at about $13 million estimated. So that's below. In the SEC, you've got Texas A&M, Alabama, Georgia, and LSU, and Tennessee. So 6 teams above Florida. And from a spending standpoint, obviously the SEC is the highest revenue and all this. Florida's about middle of the pack money wise in the SEC. And, you know, I feel like there's been a little bit in the last like 10 years, 15 years before NIL really took off. There was some missteps from Florida administration and in how they could have handled some potential donors here that could have been some real big cash cows that we see at these other schools. So yeah, I mean, obviously, for some kids or for some recruits, at the end of the day, the bottom line is the bottom line. How much money? If one place is offering me $500,000 more, and I'm 18 years old, and I mean that's a lot of money. I mean, straight up, that's a lot of money. I think what Troutwine's quote more was going at wasn't to diminish Florida's budget. It was more of saying, you know, we may not be offering as much money as a Texas or as much money as a Georgia. But if you're going to trust the process and trust me as a position coach and want to go to the NFL and become a first round pick, like we mentioned, those guys did earlier, then Florida is an option. And those are the types of recruits Florida wants. Of course, they want to land 5 stars, but they want to land guys who want to play for Florida. I mean, that's obvious. I think that goes without saying. But at the end of the day, it's not just about buying a roster. It's about buying the right roster, if you want to look at it like that. Indiana bought the right roster this year. Ohio State bought the right roster the year before. Look how much money Ohio State spent this year, and it didn't work out. I mean, it's not just about the bottom line. Of course, it matters. When Texas can spend $10 million more than you can in a certain cycle, Texas is probably going to land some highly touted recruits compared to you. But that's not everything for a lot of these recruits. And I think those are the recruits that are going to come to Florida, the guys that aren't as worried about their bottom line and want to be worried about their bottom line in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think if you're listening to this and, you know, you're from a different fan base, like this may sound like coping what I'm about to say, but like I do think it's a bit overstated the way people act like it's just a straight up bidding war now. I mean, it is to an extent, but I think and again, it's hard to say. I'm kind of speculating because we don't have a lot of this is just an area of the sport where at least right now we don't really have a lot of transparency. We don't really know what these contracts look like. Certainly don't know what the offers they didn't take look like. So, you know, I think, you know, maybe this is cope, but I think that it, you know, I think that there's more to it than that. I think teams look at development, and I think ultimately kids still want to play for a team that wins games. So I mean, I think there's a lot that goes into it more than just who's offering the most money. Because again, if it was just who's offering the most money, Florida's roster probably looks a lot different right now. Because like we've said, a lot of the guys that were big retentions probably aren't retained. I mean, Dallas Wilson would have fetched a ton of money on the open market, but he's still here. I think my biggest question, like the biggest question I had when I first saw that Troutwine line is when you're saying Florida's not going to be always the highest bidder, are you talking about, you know, when they're going head to head with Oregon, with Miami, not that Florida and Oregon go head to head all that much, but you know what I mean? Like with the Miamis, the Texases of the world, because like ultimately, yeah, those schools are just spending on another level. I mean, what Miami just spent to get Darian Mensah, all told, like I can say with pretty high confidence, I don't think Florida's going to do something like that anytime soon. And when you look at those schools, they're either, you know, a conglomerate of extremely wealthy boosters like you have at Texas with all the oil money, or it's just one guy like Phil Knight at Oregon. I mean, Florida doesn't really have that. Florida doesn't have, you know, that NVIDIA money's not coming in. So Florida, that's not something Florida has right now. I mean, but my question is Florida competitive, or at least can Florida be competitive? Because every team runs into budgetary restrictions. Like, is Florida capable of going toe-to-toe and winning financially in a battle with a Georgia, with an Alabama, with an Auburn? You know, because I think at that point, if you're not, then maybe it is time to readjust the expectations a little bit. But, like, I don't really see any reason to think Florida's in such a dire spot financially that they can't do that But again, if Florida and Miami both really want a guy, if Florida and Texas both really want a guy, Florida's never going to win that bid anymore, at least the way that things are currently structured.
Yeah, I mean, let's just be completely transparent. At the end of the day, you got to win. When you're winning, people want to. These boosters want to help.
Yeah,
right. They
100%.
want to spend money on a team that's winning. What Miami just if Miami wasn't in the national championship game, if they missed the playoff, I don't think they're shelling out $10 million to go Lord Darian Mensa. This is a team that feels like they're a quarterback, like they've been the last 2 years. They feel like they could go buy a quarterback and that's going to be their guy and they could ride him to a national championship. And it almost happened this year with Carson Beck. And I think Darian Mensa has a higher ceiling than Carson Beck. I don't think that's a hot take, but I think we've seen a lot of Darian Mensa, and he's obviously going to be an impactful player in that Miami system. But like you said, if you're going one-on-one with Texas for a guy, at the end of the day, Texas will offer more money. They just have more money at their disposal. And if they really want a player, they could go. The NVIDIA money isn't here. That money, unfortunately, was mishandled. The way to get that money was definitely mishandled in the past. So, we could look at, Florida has 500,000 graduates, but how many are going to want to spend millions of dollars? I'm sure people do, but billions of dollars at this point, because that's what it feels like. We're in the Wild West right now. I mean, we're still in it. Things might be seemingly calm. I mean, they're trying to find some restrictions, but then you get.
Well, let's check in after spring ball and see how many people haven't finagled their way out of contracts by then before we make any grand claims.
Because I mean, we've seen it. If I had a nickel for every time a quarterback signed a contract and tried to get out of that contract this offseason, I'd have 10 cents.
Yeah,
so,
at least 10 cents.
At least 10 cents that we know of, because I'm sure there's a lot of tampering going on behind the scenes. But is it tampering if it's not regulated? I mean, it's a really unique time in college football. And right now, bottom line, Florida just does not have as much money as Texas, as much money as Ohio State or Oregon or even LSU or Georgia. But like you said, the guys who stayed, it obviously wasn't only about the bottom line. And of course it matters, but it might not be the thing that matters most. I think for a lot of these guys, they value what being a Florida Gator means, what the legacy of Florida is. But legacy can only do so much. This team obviously has to show some improvement this year. And I know it's a first-year head coach, but looking at the schedule, of course, it's not an easy schedule, but I don't think it's the gauntlet from last season. I think it's a little bit easier, as not horrible as of an SEC schedule as you could maybe ask for. And this is a team that can obviously be competitive next year. I think a winning season it shouldn't just be the goal. It should be the expectation at Florida. I think that goes without saying. So if Florida's going to win 4 games again next year, it doesn't really matter how much money you have. Because, I mean, if looking at it from a recruiting standpoint, would I rather play somewhere where we win 4 games or win a national championship? I think that a lot of people would answer that question the same way.
Yeah, totally. And I think you made a really good point a minute ago when you said, people kind of want to wait and see like how things are going to play out this year. I mean, I think this is something you're going to see more of. I mean, we're only really in the start of the second fiscal year in which house revenue is a thing, house money, revenue sharing money is a thing. And I think you're already seeing some booster fatigue in that regard. I think there's an element of, especially as guys, are breaking out of contracts. Not that that's a massive trend, but it's one worth monitoring because I doubt we've seen the last of it. And I think there is an element of hey, I'm not going to open my wallet every single year to fund your roster until I know you're going to do something with it. I mean, I'd be willing to bet a lot of money that Indiana's operating budget was a lot higher this year than it was the year prior. I mean, you look at how they went and got a guy in Fernando Mendoza who like Georgia wanted. There were certainly good teams. They kicked the tires on Mendoza and they were able to get him. I mean, look at LSU. Like LSU, from what I gather, because I used to cover LSU, like for most of the Brian Kelly era, I think they picked things up a little bit his last year, even though it didn't pan out. But like they were very much like middle of the road SEC in funding. They were not at the top of that. You go and get Lane Kiffin, you convince some people to open the pocketbook. So granted, is that something, have Florida gotten Lane Kiffin? Is that something they're probably seeing now? I'd say probably yeah, but to a lesser degree than you're seeing it at LSU. But I think it's something also that if Summerall comes out and wins 8-9 games, has the team at least, nominally in playoff contention by the time you get to November, and there's real proof of concept and something to build upon, because probably going to have, almost certainly going to have a returning starting quarterback and returning pieces at receiver, if things go well at least. So I think there's going to be a lot of reason to be optimistic going into 2027. And then maybe that is when you see Florida kind of make that bigger investment. And also, this is a rapidly shifting space. Like we could be talking about the financial situation, just not even at Florida, but just the way it all works in college football could look really different a year from now than it does right now. So like, I don't think it's something I'm worried about, but I also think it's an obvious limiting factor to an extent. I mean, there were guys that Florida was just priced out of in the portal. I mean, Florida was priced out of the Jordan Seaton battle. Like they were in the mix there. They sort of kicked the tires. They pretty quickly, the bidding war there pretty quickly exceeded where Florida was willing to go from all indications. So, I mean, I can't sit here and tell you that it's not a limiting factor to some degree as long as that's the case. But it's not something that like concerns me about the ability for the staff's ability to, turn this around and get it to be at least a team that is a perennial playoff contender. Maybe do you need another level of investment if you want this team to like take the step to national title contender? Yeah, maybe that's maybe a different conversation. But I think for where things are at right now, it's not where you love it to be, but it's also not in a position where I'm like, Chicken Little, the sky is falling. I think it's in a spot where it's enough for Florida to do what it needs to do, assuming that more will probably come if you're winning on the field.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thought you made a lot of good points there. And I definitely think, number one, being that we've seen turnarounds in college football from when a new coach comes in. I mean, obviously, I think Indiana is going to become a blueprint for a lot of schools, and it's going to be really hard because Kurt Cignetti's don't grow on trees.
Yeah.
I mean, I think what he's done is unbelievable. But like you said, yes, they got Mendoza over some schools that probably offered him more money, but it's not like Indiana was operating with some crazy budget. I think they made the right hire and they went from there. And for Florida, that's your hope, is that you made the right hire and you go from there. Because at the end of the day, these recruits want to go to a coach that they believe in, a position coach they believe in, a system they believe in, that they think will help them develop and become the best player they could be and to win. So I absolutely think, like we said, there's so much that could change in NIL. And this is just it's still a developing thing. It's kind of like right now baseball, how baseball, there's no regulation really in how much you can spend, right? The Dodgers can just go, okay, we want Kyle Tucker. Let's spend $500 million on Kyle Tucker. Maybe it's not that level, but I think some teams just have more money than others. In baseball, some teams have more money than others. And if you're a Marlins fan, you might really think, oh, I'd love to have Kyle Tucker, but that's just not realistic. That a Jordan Seaton who hits the portal is just not Florida's, especially that late into the portal. I think if he entered day one, Florida can maybe go, point. Okay, maybe we'd be willing to go to this point because we feel comfortable at this position group. So you'd sacrifice depth somewhere else. But I think for Florida, it's more just about, let's get guys we think can help, because we lost a lot of guys. Obviously not many of those guys were starters, but you need as many hands on deck as you could get in college football. And I think that's just a common thing that I will always preach. It's the more players you have, you figure out who's good, who's not. You play the good ones, you don't play the bad ones. But if you only have a certain handful of guys and one of them's not great, you're kind of stuck. So I think it's less about, okay, let's go spend $10 million on one player. How can you allocate the funds you have to build the best team possible? And I feel like Florida has shown that they're going to try and do that until that fails. And we'll see how NIL changes, because I'd be pretty surprised if 3 years from now there hasn't been some sort of change in how NIL works.
I wouldn't be shocked if there's a CBA in like 3 years, if I'm being perfectly honest.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think this all is in flux.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but right now we could only speculate on right now, and we don't have the numbers because they don't. We won't know the numbers. There might not be a time for a while when we know the numbers, but
yeah,
we can only speculate. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, though, we're still talking about a top 20 spending program in the country. It's just not a top 5 spending program. I mean, obviously the SEC is a different animal, but we're spending more money than Vanderbilt. We're spending more money than, even though Vanderbilt has had that success. It's just there isn't as much money there. Of course, they spend a lot of money on Jared Curtis, but there's just not as much historical background and alums that are going to be like, yes, Vanderbilt football. Let's spend a ton of money on Vanderbilt football.
Yeah, no, by no means, by any definition of the word, is Florida a have-not in this sport. That would be disrespectful to the many actual have-nots in this sport. But yeah, I mean, I think NIL and rev share is ultimately an equalizing factor. It's led to a lot of parity, especially kind of once you take out the top and bottom, when you kind of look at the middle of the sport, it's created a tremendous amount of parity. And I think because of that, like, coaching is more important than it's ever been, like just the actual on-field coaching. I think Florida, I think we both, from just what I gathered from hearing your takes in the show, like, I think we both feel pretty good about the staff that's been put together in that regard. So, is Florida's NIL funding up to par? Maybe not if you want to be an elite NIL funded program, but I think it's up to par in terms of, is it good enough for Florida to continue to build this thing out and be competitive in the SEC and even on a national level? I think it is.
Absolutely. And you also have to take into account, I mean, we've all heard the saying, Florida's an everything school. Florida is an everything school. And there's money funneling into other programs and basketball. And, some schools, it's like football is they're at Alabama, of course, basketball, yes, they're competitive, but football is like the thing. Alabama football is everything. If you're from the state of Alabama and you grew up an Alabama fan and you went to Alabama and you made it in life and you have money, you're probably going to give some money to Alabama football. That's just how it is. But at Florida, it's not like the whole school revolves around the football team. As much as to me, it does. Maybe for everybody else here, all 50,000 students here, I'm definitely in the minority there. But yeah, I mean, like you said, to say Florida's a have-not in NIL would be disrespectful. But they're not Texas. They're not Texas A&M, unless all of a sudden they find gold in the middle of Archer Road.
And even then, I don't know. Would it go into Florida football?
I don't know the gold rate anymore either. Honestly, I've never really.
Where's that?
I don't know. I can only keep track of so many things.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I mean, that's a great point I think you made at the end there, that Florida is, does pride itself on being an everything school. Just won a national championship in basketball, looking to hopefully repeat. And also, baseball program that perennially spends a decent amount relative to most of the country too. And we'll get into that because Diamond Sports kicking off in this week. Softball started last week, and they are already 7-0, I believe. They got another win tonight against JU, so they're off to a nice start. They're ranked like 6th in the country, I think, depending on the poll you look at. And then baseball starts this weekend. Home series against UAB. Team ranks, I think, as high as 12, as low as 22, so a decent amount of variance depending on the poll you're looking at here. But like, I think a lot of reasons to be excited about this team this year. I think starting with the pitching staff, which should be one of the best. You know, your weekend rotation has the potential to be one of the best in the entire country between Liam Peterson and Aiden King coming back, two really good, you know, reliable pitchers last year. Maybe a little bit of inconsistency, especially from the former, but I think ultimately you feel good about those two. And just today, I believe today, they announced that Cooper Walls, the Hawaii transfer and reigning Big West freshman pitcher of the year, will be getting the Sunday start, at least in this opening series. And then, you know, so I think that's a starting group you feel good about, some decent depth out of the bullpen there. And then looking at the lineup, you know, you've got some transfers coming in. I think maybe the headliner is Sam Mills, the reigning from Columbia, the reigning Ivy League player of the year. He's going to be your shortstop. And then also getting some guys back who were hurt for a lot of last year, and Kyle Jones and Cade Kerlin. So I think ultimately a lot of reasons to be optimistic, even though I think there's maybe questions about, like, is this an elite national championship contending team? I don't think we know the answer to that yet, but I think it should be one that hopefully doesn't have the same struggles in SEC play that Florida had for a lot of last season.
Yeah, I mean, last season was just one of the more unique seasons you'll ever see from a team, regardless of sport. 1-11 start in SEC play to going to beat Texas in a series.
Finished 500. Finished 500 after a 1-11 start.
I mean, just what a weird season. Obviously, didn't really end the way you would have liked, and obviously, Kevin O'Sullivan, he will not be managing this UAB series. He serving a 3-game suspension, but it all really starts on the mound, and like you said, and I think Liam Peterson has shown flashes of one of the better pitchers in the entire nation, and a guy who, there's a reason this guy is consistently mocked in the first round of every MLB mock draft you'll see going into this season, a guy who has been on MLB radars, and just someone with the stuff that you really want to see from an ace. It's more just the consistency, and that's hard. It's really hard as a pitcher in college baseball to get to that consistent point, because in the MLB, like you just get in your routine and you're a professional. I mean, that's your thing. I mean, there's a lot, you have other things on the plate here, but going into his third year, I would say a better year in 24 than he had in 25. So he'll be looking more to get more towards that 24 season and get consistent results. But Aiden King was just such a revelation last season. Really was so dominant at points. And I think there was a lot of the pitching issues were in the bullpen. And, you know, Liam McNeely had to fill a bullpen role. And he's a guy who is absolutely in the conversation. We'll see how Cooper Walls does on Sunday. But, you know, I don't think they'd hesitate to try Liam McNeely as that third starter. And he's talented enough. I don't think there's any question there. It's just he showed a lot of flashes as a reliever, and you want to kind of see those same flashes as a starter. So not a lot of questions in the front end, but maybe in the back end of the pitching. And like you mentioned, hitting wise, you know, a lot of guys moving on. You know, Jaden Bastian's injury was a big blow. He was definitely going to be a part of this outfield and was going to make a great rotation. And now we're kind of just looking at Kyle Jones, Hayden Yost, and Blake Sear as your three guys, not much room to maneuver there. That's why you have depth. And that's something Coach O'Sullivan has mentioned multiple times of, you know, you always want to be ready. So I think Brendan Lawson is, of course, a player to watch. I mean, he was amazing as a freshman. Again, consistency. There was really high highs and some low lows where it just seemed like the pure talent was getting beat by maybe some more experienced pitchers in the conference. But now he's seen a year of SEC pitching. This is a guy who can play anywhere in the infield and just has all the raw tools of just an elite infielder. If he can make a jump, I think this is a dangerous team. Of course, schedule wise, you look, top 6, top 25 teams in the conference. Florida's facing, headlined by LSU. You've got FSU and Miami non-conference, both ranked. There's going to be a lot of competition that this team will face, but I think going into the season, there are high hopes and good feelings and some smiles from Kevin O'Sullivan, which
Yeah. That was that was almost bizarre. That his demeanor, and that I've never seen that man act like that before.
I mean, obviously there was a lot of, I do work at the Alligator, and there was some reporting that happened in the fall of some potential news. Of course, the severity of that and whatever that might have been. Obviously, Florida felt comfortable with him as going into the season. And, if this positive attitude, if Florida gets a hot start, I mean, I know it's weird. It's weird now, but maybe it becomes a new thing. And I think a lot of Florida fans want to be smiling when they talk about this baseball team going into the season because, like we said, a lot of new faces, but a lot of talent and a lot of depth.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, you brought up the Bastion injury. I mean, that was a real bummer. I think a guy who was going to play a big role on this team this year. I don't know. He had the leg injury in October. I don't. You might know the answer to this. I'm not sure. I couldn't find anything definitive. Are there any outside hopes of him coming back at any point this year, or is he done?
It seemed pretty dim,
Okay.
um, based on what was said in the press conference. I wasn't there personally, but
Mhm.
um, one of my coworkers was, and it just seemed like they weren't very hopeful. And the coach definitely said he had confidence in Jones, Yosir as the outfield, and that's what Florida is really going to rely on.
Yeah. Yeah, and Sully talked about that. Talking about the depth in the outfield. Talk a lot too about the positional flexibility within the infield. A lot of guys that you can move around and play in a few spots. A lot of depth at catcher, which I mean we've seen catcher depth get strained on this team in the past. So yeah, I mean, I think the way they're built, there's some new faces, so it's hard to take anything for granted. I mean, who knows? And like you mentioned, McNeely could end up competing for that Sunday spot. He could be your closer too. I'm curious to see how that looks this weekend. Not sure maybe hopefully you won't need a closer. This is a team that was not particularly good in the American Conference last year. So hopefully you shouldn't need a closer at any point this weekend. A legit closing situation, but maybe. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think a lot of reason to be optimistic. I mean, last year, obviously disappointing end in the tourney, but maybe the most impressive coaching job of O'Sullivan's time here, just turning things around. And the year before was, you said that was the most bizarre year ever. And barely eclipsing the prior year, which was also one of the craziest, years, especially with the run that team made in the postseason. I mean, ultimately, if you get there and you're healthy enough, because I think that was really the problem last postseason is they just were not healthy enough to make a run with what they had available by the time they got to June or May, whenever that was. So I think this team, if it's healthy, I think you get there a lot of younger guys, a lot of new faces. If they can get in the field with a semi, reasonable path, I think you got to like the ceiling just because of how they've handled tournament situations in the past and the way they've kind of brought teams along as they go. But yeah, I'm excited for this season. I love college baseball. I love having just kind of a random game to put on a Tuesday, Wednesday night. It's a lot of fun. So looking forward to watching the series this weekend. And obviously, like you said, Sully not going to be in the dugout for that. He'll return for the midweek following that. But yeah, so we'll see how the Gators look this weekend.
Yeah, and you brought up softball starting 7-0. They're up to number 4 in some rankings. Uh, they won 20-0 yesterday against Jacksonville, 11-1 today, and 6 different players have hit homers. 3 of them with at least 2. Taylor Schumacher, who was electric last year, tying the UF home run record, already has 3 this year. She's on pace for another great year, and Keegan Rothrock has just been everything and more for this team. 21 and 2/3 innings so far. Only 7 hits allowed, 0.97 ERA, 4-0 record. I mean, if we saw her throw a gazillion pitches last year when it came down to the wire, and she was fantastic. And this team, again, talent-wise, has all the talent you can ask for. Everybody's hitting, it seems like, including some players who, you maybe weren't expecting to have such a blistering start, like Gabby Comia's hitting 522. I mean, obviously we're talking a 7-game sample size, but there hasn't been any close games so far, even against a Michigan team that's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, Tim Walton's always got a team that's highly competitive, with the best of them. I think no different this year. I think a team that's capable of making a run to Oklahoma City. They're off to a good start. I mean, it's always funny, like the game yesterday, like I always wonder, because so many of these softball games, these early season games have run rules. And I'm always like, how bad would it get? Well, we got our answer last night. The answer is pretty bad against Jacksonville. So,
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, I think both bat and ball sports. I think a lot of reasons to be really optimistic this year. Obviously, we've seen good looks from the softball team. Got a win over Michigan in that tournament last weekend. Who was not ranked, but they're kind of just on the cusp there. So a very solid team. And yeah, we'll get into when we are back on the show next week, we can get into how baseball looked in their opening series and midweek. But yeah, I think really exciting for both squads, and should be fun to see how far they can go.
absolutely.
But let's kind of shift gears now as we've already been looking ahead for a lot of this show, whether it's looking ahead to official visits or what have you. But let's look ahead to some spring ball, because I think it's about time. We're not too far away. We can start doing some positional previews here. Like we said earlier, I'm not sure I'm convinced you're not going to see any movement after the spring, but more or less the roster's in a finalized spot right now. Again, could still be some defections, both in terms of additions and subtractions. But I think for now we kind of know what we're looking at here, and we'll start with what's going to be the biggest storyline of spring ball, which is the quarterback battle. First time in a while that Florida really has gone into a season with a pretty open-ended quarterback battle. I mean, your mileage may vary. Some people don't see it as a super open-ended quarterback battle, and I'm curious, after hearing what Summerall and Faulkner and Craddock had to say about it, kind of what your take is on that. But obviously between Aaron Philo, a guy who Buster Faulkner knows, hasn't played a ton, kind of saw some sporadic action last year as a change of pace. I don't know if that's the way to put it, but when Haynes King was injured and struggling to throw the ball, they kind of had Philo come in for passing downs, and he played pretty well. And then made a start this year against Gardner Webb, had a touchdown and a pick, but threw for 373 yards. Again, FCS game, so not a ton you can glean from that. But so we're there's a lot of trust with Faulkner on that one, on the eval there. Obviously, a guy that Faulkner really wanted to bring with him. And he'll be competing with Tramel Jones, who was an interesting retention. I'd be honest, not necessarily a guy that I would have expected Florida would retain at the when the coaching transition happened. But I think it's interesting that they wanted to bring him back and seem to, at least nominally, be giving him a real shot to compete for the starting job here. But I'm curious where, after kind of hearing the coaches talk about it and just kind of what you've gathered, how you feel about the way that this looks.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all, just from the outside looking in, see Aaron Philo as the favorite for this job. And I don't think that's a stretch. I think he probably right now is the favorite. But Tramel Jones absolutely has a shot at winning this job. And I think it will just come down to who does better, whether that be in spring ball and across practice. B. John Summerall said there is no starting quarterback. He talked about how confident Buster Faulkner is in Aaron Philo, obviously bringing him in and very high recommendations. I mean, Georgia Tech fans were not happy when Aaron Philo left because that was the guy. That was the guy who was going to take over and, broke all those high school records. And while the stats may not show it, if you look, PFF, how much you buy into that, I'm personally a fan, but I know it's not for everybody, but
Mm-hmm.
under the hood, a lot of really promising things for Aaron Philo, and the guy's got plenty of talent. But Summerall said it's an endorsement of how them having no starting quarterback just speaks about how well Tramel Jones has responded to this new staff, and they feel like he's got a really high ceiling. But he also mentioned, Darian Mensah was the third quarterback, 2 weeks before the first game. There was an interesting Joe Craddock quote about Will Griffin that, when he said it kind of got me a little bit. He said he called him a wild stallion, which I've never
That's
heard
an
anybody
interesting way to
refer.
describe a quarterback. I don't know if that's positive or negative. It's kind of, I feel like that could go either way.
So he said he's like a horse that's like big, strong, and looks pretty. Those were his words. But you got to tame him a little bit. So like,
Yeah.
he said he's got a lot to learn, but he has good football IQ for being an incoming freshman, and he kind of made it like, oh, he's got to learn the process. To me, that reads as he's gonna redshirt. I mean, that just kind of seems like the direction, and I feel like that was always the direction.
Yeah. Of
Obviously,
course.
a guy with a lot of hype, but I think the other two options are just a little more ready to play. But I mean, Buster Faulkner spoke a lot about Aaron Philo, and obviously we know the relationship those two have. And you know, he said he has great pre-snap awareness. He gets the ball of his hands faster on any quarterback he's been around. Natural passer of the football, moves better than you think. I mean, all the things that an offensive coordinator was saying that about a quarterback that hasn't yet won a starting job. I think says a lot. But he talked about how he recruited Tramel Jones when he was at Georgia originally,
Mhm.
and he has extreme arm talent. That's what he said. I think again, there's no given. It will come down to who plays better. If I had to put money on it, I think Aaron Philo will be the starting quarterback. But is there going to be a decision made on that until a couple of weeks before the season? I really doubt it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and talking about Philo, yeah, like Faulkner said, a lot to like about him. I mean, for a guy that was like by no means an elite recruit, got some juice in the arm. Like I think there's definitely reason to, you can see the vision in the kind of brief glimpses we've seen of him playing. And obviously, I think just you have to kind of, I mean, I assume you were as well. I mean, most people were excited about the Buster Faulkner hire. I thought pretty highly of it. I think that's an element of you kind of got to trust that the guy he has seen every day for 2 years, that he very much like it wasn't like this was a backup plan, right? It wasn't like Florida had someone else they tried for, didn't get, and we're like, okay, I guess we'll get Aaron Philo. Like, no, this was plan A. Like, this is what they wanted to do. So that says a lot. I mean, I think it also says a lot that they seem to believe that Trammell is can actually compete. I mean, one thing we've talked about on the show is I think Philo winning the job doesn't necessarily tell you that much either way, just because it's kind of the expected outcome. I think Trammell winning the job would tell you a lot because, again, we just know Philo has that inside track. So for Trammell to come in and impress the staff enough to convince Buster Faulkner that he should be starting over Buster Faulkner's own handpicked guy, I think that would say a lot about where Trammell's at And it'll just be interesting to see, when we get into spring ball, because like we said, there's just a lot of questions. I mean, Philo limited experience. Trammell basically hasn't played a meaningful snap of football in college. I mean, he got garbage time reps against Long Island and looked good, and got negative garbage time reps against Kentucky. Didn't look so good, but also nothing looked good in that game. Certainly not pinning that one. The true freshman playing on the road in a blowout. Not really putting that one on him. But we just don't know. I mean, I think it's really interesting. And I don't know. Maybe you know the answer to this. I don't think they've really said if they're going to actually have like a public televised spring game, because they didn't last year. But I think they'd be doing the fan base a disservice, frankly, if they don't, because I think this is spring games you can't really take much away from, but this one with these two guys who no one's really seen play a lot of meaningful snaps, I think that would be something that is actually probably worth paying attention to and maybe reading into a little bit, at least if you're a fan.
Yeah, there's been no indication on televisation. Good news for our listeners and viewers, though, is I'll be there, and
Yeah.
I will tell you everything I saw with my own two eyes, and everything that was said after that game. And so, again, a unique new insight we have here, as being a student here and someone who my job is to report on Florida football, and it's a pretty cool job. So I like it. I'd like to keep doing it. But yeah, I mean, Joe Craddock talked about how Trammell, people have started to kind of flock to him as a leader, which I think says a lot. I mean, a guy who, like you said, we saw 4 quarters of football. I was of the camp that I wish we saw a little more, especially against LSU. I think there was no reason not to try. But obviously that was a different coaching staff. I think we saw against Kentucky, there wasn't as much hesitancy when DJ Lagway was not playing well. Why not? What's the harm? Obviously, Trammell, he got pressured like 6 times in those 2 quarters, and like you said, there was also like 3 drops. Not a lot going well team wise. It was kind of just, we're out there to run out the clock. But yeah, a guy who, like you said, they did choose to keep. I mean, from all indications, DJ Lagway, kind of going back to that, I know, of course, there's been discussion about this. If they wanted DJ Lagway to stay, DJ Lagway probably was going to stay. And
certainly what it seems like.
And they chose to go with Aaron Philo and Trammell Jones. And I think a lot of that is they've talked about Buster Faulkner talked about what he's looking for in a quarterback, right? You're looking for someone good on 3rd downs, 2-minute situations. Those were 2 things he said. Joe Craddock was talking about, what he likes in a quarterback being a guy who makes good decisions in the pocket, right? And accuracy being number 1. It's not as much about the arm strength, right? You want a guy who's going to be more accurate and make the throws where they need to go. So to me, that sounds like Aaron Philo would have the upper hand based on what they're kind of looking for in a quarterback as maybe a better decision maker. Again, we're going off no tape here pretty much. Mm-hmm. But based on the little glimpses we've seen, that seems to be more of Aaron Philo's bread and butter. But both of these guys, obviously talented, maybe not the highest touted recruits, but definitely not, walk-on level quarterbacks. And I think at the quarterback position, my personal philosophy, again, first episode, I like sharing some of my thoughts on football as a whole. At quarterback it's not as much, I think, especially in college football, I don't think you need, of course, Indiana happened to have this, but Ohio State the year before did. If you have the roster around the guy, as long as the guy's not turning the ball over and making the throws he needs to make, which I'm talking, 3-yard out routes, you need a quarterback who can make those throws. We saw plenty of those this season where those throws weren't made. And you need a guy who's going to make the easy throws because they add up. You need a quarterback who will make the right play and make the right decision. And I think we're looking at a system where it might be easier for those quarterbacks to make this decision. And Aaron Philo has 2 years of knowing that system, living that system, being ready to step in at any moment in that system. And we saw Haynes King be really productive last season. And in all honesty, like Haynes King isn't anything crazy. I mean, like Haynes King has guts, and he would play through injury, but you weren't asking Haynes King to make the craziest throw in the world. You were asking Haynes King to do pretty easy things. I think they think Aaron Philo could do more. Maybe not from a mobility standpoint, but from a actually throwing the ball standpoint. So I definitely think, there's some hesitancy from Florida fans about this quarterback competition, and that, oh, great. It's a guy with no experience versus a guy with no experience. And wow, what a competition. But I mean, I think it says a lot about the faith that Buster Faulkner has in Florida. It's kind of like, it's like he's the coach's son a little bit. When
Yeah.
you're playing, little league, and it's like they always have that guy on the team because he's the coach's son, and he knows what the coach wants because he's around the coach all the time. So just having a quarterback room, and I think it's a blessing for every Florida fan that everybody involved in that quarterback room from the last couple seasons is not anymore. I think they just needed to change up everything about how that position worked, and it will be for the better. And it's a very interesting spot that we will see how Aaron Philo and Tramel Jones compete. We'll see how Will Griffin looks. I really doubt we're going to see another quarterback emerge outside of an emergency.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like you're talking about Faulkner, he definitely is risking a decent amount here. I mean, a guy whose name is as hot as it's ever been, got some play for some G5 head coaching jobs as well. And I mean, I think that's pretty clearly where he wants to end up. Like, I think, frankly, if this goes really well, this is probably a 1-year rental here, but I think that's fine if it works. But I mean, again, things can change really fast. Your star can, fade really fast. And if so Faulkner is really banking a lot on Philo or Tramel being the guy. And I mean, Tramel Craddock, said this week that, he's picked up the offense really fast. So, curious how that actually looks when they get out on the grass in a couple weeks for spring ball. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a really fascinating quarterback battle. One of the more interesting ones in the country, just because in this day and age with transfer guys and getting like 3-year starter transfer portal guys, you don't really come into many quarterback battles where it's two guys who we really don't know that much about battling it out. So it's going to be interesting, and I think that's probably what most of us are going to be having our eye on the most as spring practice gets underway. So I'm excited we have you here, Max, to kind of give us the insights and kind of, as much as the coaches are tipping their hand on how that's progressing, which probably won't be too much, but, we'll kind of get at least an idea of how that's trending as spring ball gets underway.
Absolutely. And, I think you brought up a great point. The Buster Faulkner experience here at UF, like you said, if it goes well, I think at most 2 years here. So Joe Craddock, I mean, this is a guy who was an offensive coordinator at Tulane and I'm sure he had other offensive coordinator offers if he wanted them, and chose to be a quarterbacks coach at Florida and follow John Summerall. And how much of his Faulkner system might he, I think we could see a world where Joe Craddock would have potentially, step up in a scenario based on how well the quarterbacks were to play and would have familiarity with these guys. Obviously, Faulkner, I know personally, like you mentioned, I just think that's such a slam dunk hire. Just a guy we've seen. I think what he did at Georgia 2 with Stetson Bennett just says a lot about the type of quarterback coach he is and offensive mind. Because, again, like I said earlier, you just need a quarterback who makes the right decisions. And I don't think anybody's going to bang the table and say Stetson Bennett is the most talented quarterback they've ever watched play football. I don't think anybody feels that way, but he was productive and he made the plays he needed to make, and 2 national championships. And of course, as Gators, don't want to give Georgia too much credit, but I'll give Buster Faulkner credit because he's our guy now. So, Buster Faulkner, you're the reason. I hope you can be the reason here for whenever you're here. And but definitely a guy who is trending towards becoming a head coach sooner than later if the right opportunity becomes available. But that's the future. Now is now. We look at this quarterback room. We don't know. If I had to guess, it's Aaron Philo. But like we said, we will keep you guys updated on that. And based on whatever we get, any tips of the cap or any loose lips, or anything we see in 5 minutes of stretching.
Yeah, routes on air. You're gonna decide the starter based on some routes on air.
I almost got run over my first practice last year by J Mike, and he apologized to me in a presser after, and that was very nice. He did not need to do that. We had never interacted before, and he apologized, and I wish him the best. I hope he kills it at the combine, and I'm excited to see, 9 guys heading to the combine. The draft. Another thing about me, the NFL draft is my favorite day of the year, more than my birthday, more than anything else. I love the NFL draft. Can't wait to dive into how these guys do at the combine and my thoughts on them as prospects from a non-Florida, but just from all right, let me look at these guys without any tinted glasses on. I end up scouting like 400 guys every year, so I'm one of those.
Yeah.
People.
Okay. Yeah. We'll wrap up that segment there. But yeah, you're like, I knew a guy in high school who he had a notebook where he would do multiple versions of a 7-round mock draft. Like a notebook that was like version 5.0 of the 7-round mock draft. It's like, dude, I've done 1-round mock drafts before and it sucks. I couldn't imagine.
The best is when, though, it pays out and you have a guy. My best call when I was in high school, I was on Tariq Woolen. I was like, that's a guy. He's going to come into the league, impact player. I tweeted about him. He retweeted me. That was like the coolest thing ever before he got drafted. And he had that great rookie year, and I was banging the table. I was like, told you. There we go. We won't talk about anything that's happened since then. He is a Super Bowl champion now. So good luck to him wherever he ends up in free agency. I don't think he's going back to Seattle.
Yeah, probably not. But yeah, so we're pushing the 2-hour mark here, so we'll probably wrap this up here in a second. But thank you guys so much for tuning in on this late night, and thank you, Max, for joining the show. And excited to have you moving forward. This one was a lot of fun.
Yes, absolutely. Appreciate it, Tyler. Appreciate everybody tuning in. I hope you guys continue to show up. We're gonna dive into so much more. This was just the beginning. It was still the beginning where it was 1 week of preparation and not even too much conversation, and a 2-hour show where we really just, went into it. So, and definitely a lot more in the future. So appreciate everybody tuning in. And yeah, Tyler, you want to wrap this one up?
Yeah, so just so you guys know, moving forward, we're going to be shooting for Wednesday nights as our regular show. Typically, we'll do this earlier. We'll do this still at 7:00 most Wednesdays. We moved it late this week because of the basketball game, and I think there's one more Wednesday where there's a basketball game. We'll probably do the same thing. But moving forward, you can expect us to be live on Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern. Also, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe at Florida Gators Live at the Voice of College Football. You can find us on YouTube where you get your podcasts. So we appreciate you guys tuning in, and we will see you next week.